international week, there were sort of few opportunities for trading, unless, of course, you wanted to get involved with the St Johnstone's Paint Trophy, which I didn't. So I headed off to Brazil, which is not a venue that I tend to have a look at all. But there was a particular game there between Internacional and Vasco da Gama. So, knowing very, very little about the league and about the teams, except from sort of a vague historical perspective, I knew that Vasco da Gama were traditionally one of the sort of bigger teams in the Brazilian Campeonato. So a little bit of research, and as is my normal approach, I looked at what I call the match line, and Internacional were sort of round about sort of mid-table, but interestingly Vasco da Gama were propping up the foot of the table with a sort of disastrous record of having only 13 points from 21 games, and they'd lost 8 of their 10 away games. So yeah, it all pointed toward an Internacional win, and the market had them priced up at around about 1.56, 1.58. Leaving that aside just for the moment, I decided to have a look at the goal lines, and I remember one of our members, Gundolf, who does trade this league in the early hours of the morning, when most of us are asleep. I remember him sort of saying once that traditionally there are sort of a few goals in this particular league, so unders, no surprise, were trading at sort of 1.64. It was overs that was trading around about 2.36. A little further delving into the statistics showed that the market had got this absolutely right, really, in terms of their sort of pricing. However, because I didn't really know anything at all, I was kind of trading blind in some ways. I mean, I do like to trade on games or teams or leagues that I have at least some sort of knowledge of. So I was sort of heading into this based purely on what the market was telling me. I like stats, but I don't follow them blindly. So in this case, I wanted to devise a strategy and a trade that kind of covered sort of both ends of the spectrum, i.e. If the market was correct and there were going to be very, very few goals, I wanted to cover that. Yet at the same time, if Vasco da Gama were really as bad as statistics showed them to be, then I wanted to cover the possibility that Internacional could give them a sort of a good trouncing. I looked at these particular markets. The correct score market, where I backed 0-0, 1-1, 2-0 and 3-0. I also looked at the half-time, full-time market, where I backed Internacional and the draw, the draw Internacional, and the draw. So I was giving myself a fairly broad coverage on either goals were going to be scored or they weren't. My dangers, to a large extent, were going to be early goals to Internacional, or in Vasco da Gama, and the sort of higher score lines, like any other home win, 3-1 for example, and particularly sort of if Internacional did score sort of quite early, which they did on 11 minutes. Now there's a possibility here where traders, let's say, who have backed under 2.5 pre-match and a very early goal is scored, they will tend to go in again to that market and back it at a higher price, which sort of basically means that they don't have to stay in the trade for as long because the price is higher. So I decided to actually against that, and I had a feeling that Internacional were on the route to goals. So I backed over 4.5 for £5 at 5.5. Then they scored again on sort of 40th minute. So I backed over 4.5 again, for another £5 at 6.6. So I'd increased my liability basically by £10 by backing the 0.5, and I got no sort of cover now as we enter the second half on the half-time, full-time market, and particularly as Internacional went into a 3-0 lead and then even a 4-0 lead. I decided at least to clear the £10 red on the under 4.5 by laying for £15 at 1.59. I didn't want to have a whole £43 loss at this particular stage. The bet was matched there, and on the 65th minute, but 2 or 3 minutes after I made that lay bet, Manchester National scored a 5th goal, and at the very end I decided to lay in injury time the under 5.5 goal market. I'd already was assured of a £10 profit overall, so I spent half of 50% of that by laying under 5.5 at 1.38, and they scored in the 90th minute, 93rd minute even. So that gave me a £24 profit overall.